I'm getting married, brother. Can you come to our wedding? It was a happy call from my sister. Of course I said yes. After asking about the date and place of the wedding, Jane said, "Oh, and I want you to walk me down the aisle." My name is Kevin, and I come from a family of 4, with my parents and my sister. But when I was a senior in high school, my father was involved in an accident and passed away. We were all devastated by the sudden event. My mother, who is a housewife at the moment, was unable to find a job, and we had to move to her hometown. I dropped out of high school just 6 months before graduation. I could have transferred to the high school where we were going to move, but the procedure looked like a hassle, and I began to think that I didn't have to go there when I thought about the tuition fees, so I voluntarily chose to drop out of high school. My mother and sister feel bad that I dropped out of high school, but that doesn't matter to me. There are people who discriminate on the basis of education, but in a way, it is a filter that keeps me from associating with them. Besides, there is more to the world than just education. I'm currently running a company that is taking off with a friend. I live out of my parents' house, but I met my sister's fiancé once when I stopped by. He seemed like a nice, smart young man. He and my sister went to high school together, and I think he told me that his father or a relative was a congressman. About a month before the wedding, I happened to be in the area on a business trip, so I visited my mother and sister at their home. I was surprised to find that my sister's fiancé was also there. She said, "You were coming home for the night, and I wanted you to meet him, so I surprised you." I told her that she should have told me instead of surprising me. I told her I only brought a souvenir for her and Mom, and that I was sorry, but he said that it's his fault for coming on his own, which seemed humble to me. He even gave me an expensive-looking drink. He was such a nice guy. I would be drinking that day. Thanks to that, I may have talked about things I didn't need to talk about. On the day of the wedding, I entered the venue excited and nervous. After all, I was going to walk down the aisle. I respected my father so much that I wondered if I would be able to take his place, but I made up my mind to do it properly for my sister, who wanted to walk with me. Once at the venue, I met the groom's family for the first time. I heard that there had been a dinner meeting once, but unfortunately, I couldn't attend due to work. When we met at the venue, my mother whispered to me, "Kevin, those people are his parents." I was unable to attend the meeting, so I told my mother that I would go to meet the groom's parents as soon as I saw them, and that I wanted to know immediately. My mother said she had already greeted the groom's parents, so I went to meet them by myself. "You must be the elder brother." The groom's father was not very friendly. The groom's mother seemed to be the type who modestly followed her husband. I greet her, and Mildred begins to introduce herself. "There are a lot of senators in my family. I am one, and of course my son will be one in the future. I need your sister to do everything she can to support my son." I had a bad feeling about the way she spoke. Sure enough, the usual questions were asked. "Where did you go to college?" I opened my mouth, trying to hold back a sigh. I had dropped out of high school. As you probably know, my father passed away when I was in high school. My words were interrupted when I said that much. "So, you dropped out, huh?" I must have looked like I was biting my tongue. Yeah, I guess so. The next thing I knew, Mildred was snickering condescendingly at me. "I see. Take care of everything today, won't you?" And then she turned her back on me. Her husband followed her. I never talked to my sister about her parents-in-law. I don't know about her father-in-law, but her mother-in-law is clearly the type of person who looks at people based on their educational background. I tried not to get involved with people like that, but it seems they'll become part of the family now. Well, they don't want anything to do with me, and I don't intend to get actively involved either. Anyway, let's just go about our day without much hassle. My sister was so beautiful in her bridal dress that I couldn't even imagine. I didn't expect Jane to turn out so well, that my mouth was gaping open. Naturally, she punched me in the stomach, but I was still relieved to see her smiling happily. My mother was sobbing when the ceremony started, and it was hard to calm her down. At that time, I didn't even think about the incident that would happen later. When the ceremony was over and we entered the reception hall, we saw a lineup of faces we had seen somewhere before. They were members of the House of Representatives, the Senate, and other people that he invited. There were many such guests in addition to those seated with their relatives. My eyes met one of them, and I was surprised to see him, but the announcement was made that the wedding party was about to start, so I left it at that. The groom's father looked happy, which made my eyes burn. When my father passed away, I remembered him as someone who was more worried about my mother, sister, and I, more than himself. There wasn't much I could do as a high school student at the time, but after a while, when things calmed down, my mother and sister told me they were glad I was there. Maybe this is what it feels like to give your daughter's hand in marriage. As I was thinking about this, the groom's father began his speech. His speech was so boring that it sounded like a principal speech, and I couldn't help but reach for my drink. He was still talking about how the groom was a good son. I noticed that the conversation turned to the mother-in-law's own boastful talk. When I looked at the stage, I noticed that the groom's face looked a little grim. As I was thinking that I was getting tired of Mildred's speech, the topic suddenly changed and the guest's eyes turned to me. I never would have guessed that our daughter-in-law's brother had not even graduated from high school. Mildred looked at me with a laugh. Probably due to the alcohol in her system. I was puzzled. Why should I be in the limelight like this? I wanted to leave right now if I could just get out and the conversation would stop, but Mildred kept attacking me, telling me that a middle school graduate like me would only bring shame to the family. I was used to being told this sort of thing, but who would have thought that the would-be mother-in-law would say such a thing at my sister's wedding? A middle school education was my choice, but still, my mother and sister are somewhat apologetic about it. I couldn't quite make out my sister's expression in the stage, but my mother's face was scrunched up as she sat next to me. I was more angry at Mildred for ruining my sister's wedding than I was at myself for being told that, but I can't talk back to her. I told my bewildered mother that I was leaving for the time being. I hoped that would be the end of the conversation. The next moment, my sister's voice rang out. My sister had the microphone in her hand. "Do you know who my brother is?" she said. I could tell Jane was furious. Even though I could only hear her voice, the audience went silent. Mildred stopped, and I looked at Jane, but she was glaring at Mildred. Jane doesn't seem to see me. You're the star of this event. Don't make your position worse for me, I think to myself. I'm going to have to give Jane a lecture later. But then I look at the stage, trying to figure out what to do next. Jane didn't pay me any mind and continued her story. My brother supported my mother and me, who were too exhausted to do anything until he dropped out of high school when our father died. It was not that he was uneducated. Even in high school, his grades were high. It is disgusting to look at people based on their academic background, when you don't know anything about them. What kind of thing to say to someone who is about to become a father, even if it was only a stepfather? I rushed to stop her, but it was the pathway that stopped me. The groom took the microphone that Jane was holding and began to speak. He said, "Mom, I admire my brother-in-law. He has established a successful company even though he is young. I'm going to marry Jane, and I'm proud to be related to her brother." Hearing that, I thought to myself, Mike, you said too much, but there was no room for me to interject. Or rather, thanks to the groom's drawling speech, no one cared about me. I heard that the groom is the secretary of a congressman who is a relative, and for someone to be in that position, of course anyone would listen to him. Mildred's Harvard talk was all just about her own boasting and prejudice. It is obvious which of the two the public would rather listen to, but I was happy to know that Jane's husband-to-be is a man who is fully on Jane's side. The groom is still talking. He said, "It's time for you to step back now, Mother, because all you're doing is hurting people with your talk. I'm sorry for making you all feel uncomfortable. Please accept my apologies." Mildred then said, "You would rather take the side of a middle school graduate than your own parents? I'm disinheriting you." She started to say outrageous things like that. You can't just disown your son at a wedding. I was so afraid that my very existence had caused such a thing that my voice came out loudly. "Please don't say that." When I raised my voice, I received attention from the invited guests all at once, but that doesn't matter now. You can't just let your emotions get the better of you and say all kinds of things. Mildred glared at me as I said that. "Shut up, you middle school graduate." I was surprised that she would still say such a thing after all this time. I usually don't take people who tell me I'm a middle school graduate seriously, but if I backed down right then and there, I'd be leaving my mother sad, and I'd feel bad for Jane and my brother-in-law, who had gone out of their way to speak up. I fought for my family's honor, not my own. Sure, I'm a middle school graduate. Some people, like you, say that's a bad thing, but there are people in the world who have dropped out from middle school or high school for various reasons. How can you call yourself a senator without knowing that? At the very least, I wouldn't want someone like that to be on top. As I said this, the sparse applause from the audience gradually became louder and louder. It was embarrassing to receive such applause, but at least my family's honor was protected. I thought I could end it now, but Mildred was having a hard time retracting and walked up to me. "A middle school graduate is a middle school graduate. What's wrong with telling the truth? You say you're running a company, but it's not much anyway, is it?" Maybe I can't get through to this person. How could I put this situation to rest with someone who couldn't understand me no matter what I said? That's all I could think about, but I couldn't come up with any good words. I could see the groom getting off the stage and coming towards us. I want to calm him down before the parent-child relationship gets complicated, but I don't know what to say to make him understand. Then I see one of the groom's invited guests get up, stop the groom, then come toward us. It was the person I had failed to greet earlier. That person turned to Mildred. "You really are shameless, aren't you?" Mildred turned around in surprise. "Sir!" The person she called Sir was a member of the Senate. He continued, "Kevin is a good business partner. You have no right to belittle him." Mildred looks at me with a surprised look on her face. I had expected to see him there, and I hadn't planned to tell her that, but now that it had happened, I had no choice but to tell her. "All of your office's internet and telecommunication systems are managed by our company." I stated the facts without hesitation. I had started up a telecommunications company with a friend, a company that produces homepages, set up internet communication environments, and handles everything from small to large projects, but it wasn't until I met the doctor, whose name is now well known and often interviewed by the media, that I realized that I was in the right place at the right time. I have known him since the 3rd year after I started my company, so it has been about 10 years now. He recognized my work and entrusted me with various assignments. He even invited me out for a drink once. From the look on Mildred's face, the hierarchical relationship between her and the teacher is clear. Mildred's complexion turned blue. I turned to Mildred and said, "He knew about my academic background, but he told me. So what? If a person who judges others based on their academic background, that means he or she has nothing else they can be proud of." That's when I changed my mind. Mildred's previous energy was gone. I looked at Mildred firmly and continued, "You can look down on me because of my education, but please don't bring my mother or Jane into this. Also, my firm isn't a big one, but we have people like you whom we work with, so please don't judge or make fun of me." Mildred looked like she was about to cry and did not know what to do. Then Bernard said to Mildred, "I didn't think you would have such a mindset. I was wondering why your son was not working with your secretary, but it seems that he's more capable. I'll have to think twice about associating with you in the future." Mildred stood there with a pale face. I turned to speak to Mildred, wanting to get this over with. "Today is a special day for the bride and groom. It is not a place to brag about yourself, nor is it a place to look down on people you don't like. Please properly apologize to the bride and groom that this happened in the middle of the ceremony." Everyone in the audience turned their attention to Mildred. Even Bernard nodded at my words. The bride and groom, who were supposed to be the focus of this occasion, looked on without complaint. I really wanted Mildred to apologize to them. With everyone's attention on her, Mildred reluctantly turned towards the stage. "I am sorry." Mildred said the apology, albeit in a small voice. It must have been humiliating for her to be told by me to apologize. Knowing that, I still said what I had to say to her. After the reception was over, I hurried to the family waiting room to see Jane and Mike, but Mike apologized to me. I said sorry to him too, feeling bad, and Jane laughed at me. "We are going to be brothers, aren't we?" Jane smiled at me, and I could feel at ease to see her off. Later, I heard that Mildred had retired from the Senate. I didn't know the details, but it seemed that the events at the wedding had sparked a rumor. It's not surprising since so many locals were invited. I received some money from Mike's father for the trouble Mildred had caused, but Mildred never appeared in front of me. According to Jane, Mildred was no longer comfortable in her hometown and moved to the countryside with her husband, but this time she complained that country life did not suit her. Since then, Mike had minimal contact with his parents, so he is not sure how they are doing. Mike is running for the next election, and he and Jane are working hard together. There are many people who discriminate on the basis of education, and I'm not saying it's wrong, but please don't forget that we have that kind of bias too. It's not that the person with the highest education is better than the person who didn't have as much. I went to work with a congressman after that, and he told me that he would like to introduce me to his relative's daughter.